Hello, I'm doing a movie review, and the movie I want to review is Bad Taste. Now, Bad Taste is a 1987 horror comedy from director Peter Jackson. This was actually Peter Jackson's directorial debut. Now, today Peter Jackson is perhaps best known as the director of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, as well as the 2005 remake of King Kong and movies like The Lovely Bones. I don't think he's directing, but I know he's producing that upcoming movie Mortal Engines. He's also famous for producing documentaries like West of Memphis, which was about the West Memphis 3. He was actually a big part of the whole Free the West Memphis 3 movement. He also recently directed a documentary called They Shall Not Grow Old, which was about World War I. But prior to The Lord of the Rings, which is the movie that really sort of made him into a big mainstream filmmaker, prior to that he was much more of a cult director and was primarily known for his horror comedies like this film, Dead Alive, aka Brain Dead, The Frighteners, Meet the Feebles, and he also did the movie Heavenly Creatures, which was not a horror comedy. It was actually a pretty hardcore drama film, but it still had this sort of weird aspect to it where you could tell Peter Jackson directed it. Now, first of all, yes, I did already review this movie a little over 3 years ago now, but I wanted to redo it because this is actually one of my top 5 favorite films of all time, and I honestly thought the old review I did was kind of a crappy review, so once again, I wanted to re-review it, so I took down my old review. Now, one of the reasons why this is one of my top 5 favorite films of all time is I just love the independent spirit of the film. The fact that Peter Jackson made this movie with his co-workers over the course of 4 years, I believe. I think he was working at the post office at the time, and apparently they shot this movie on weekends, and their effort really does show. Now, the way I just described it, I'm sure I probably made it sound like this was just some home movie that he made with his friends. Don't be put off by that, because there is actually a budget to this film. It's a low budget, but there's definitely a budget, and there's really good makeup effects in this movie, and some really good camera work as well. Even though this is a cheesy little independent film, you could see the future filmmaker in Peter Jackson with this movie. You could see how this guy would eventually evolve into bigger and better things. This is also my favorite horror comedy of all time. In a lot of ways, this is everything that I feel like a horror comedy should be. And the movie almost feels like a live-action cartoon to a certain extent, but it also combines all these different genres like horror and comedy, science fiction, and even action as well. And there's a lot of obvious nods to other horror films like Evil Dead and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I also love how, even though this is an alien movie, when the aliens take on human form, they almost act like this demented cult of serial killers, and there are even elements of the slasher genre in this movie. But the aliens even act like zombies to a certain extent when they're in human form. There are even elements of the EC horror comics. In fact, one of the characters in the movie is wearing a Tales from the Crypt t-shirt. But I love how you have all these different ideas, all these different genres and elements rolled together into one movie. Now, I first saw Bad Taste actually on this box set here called Chilling Classics. This is one of those 50 movie packs that features 50 different public domain movies, and Bad Taste is one of the films on this box set because Bad Taste is actually in the public domain, or at least it was back when this box set was put out. And I've shown this box set before because I've actually reviewed a couple of the movies on this box set. Now, I've actually collected a couple of these box sets over the years because there's just something very cool about them, because even though a lot of the movies on there are pretty bad, and that's one of the reasons why people sometimes write these kind of box sets off, the reason I like collecting them is because every so often you'll find some really weird, obscure movie on them, and sometimes you'll actually find a movie that's a genuinely good movie. And there are some pretty well-known movies that are public domain that you'll find on these public domain box sets. And I actually have 2 copies of Chilling Classics, because this edition of Chilling Classics has slightly different movies on it, but Bad Taste is available on both of them. Now, there was this video store here on Long Island where I live that, believe it or not, was open until 2017. Unfortunately, it closed last year, but believe it or not, up until when it closed down, it was actually selling and renting out VHSs, and one time when I was there, I got this VHS copy of Bad Taste. Now, the plot of Bad Taste is it's about these aliens that land in this small town in New Zealand, and they end up killing every man, woman, and child in the town because it turns out that these aliens work for this intergalactic fast food chain, and it turns out that human flesh is the new taste sensation. So, the government of New Zealand sends in this team of government agents called the Boys to kill the aliens and prevent a full-scale invasion. But in the movie, one of the boys is this guy named Derek who ends up getting killed by one of the aliens, and later on he ends up coming back from the dead and goes after these aliens with a chainsaw. But yeah, that's the plot of Bad Taste, and it's just as fun and ridiculous as it sounds. Now I want to cut to a short review on this movie done by my friend Christian Feliciano, who at this point has become kind of a regular guest in my YouTube videos. But here is his review on Bad Taste.
Sometimes when I watch the Lord of the Rings trilogy, I wonder to myself, does Hollywood really care about people's pasts? And there's times where, you know, in other movies, I'll think, okay, maybe they do because they're putting this guy who usually does science fiction films or horror films or fantasy films, whatever it is, to do the newest film. And you say, okay, maybe that makes sense. But then you look at the Lord of the Rings trilogy and you're like, okay, did they know who Peter Jackson was before he did the Lord of the Rings? Because I hate to say this, Hollywood, but this guy directed Bad Taste and Braindead. These are 2 of the most violent, disgusting films of all time. I mean, how could you look at that and say, oh yeah, this guy can do Lord of the Rings? Now, don't get me wrong. I love Peter Jackson to death. Don't think that I'm trying to trash him or anything like that. I love him to death. I love most of his movies. I don't know if I've seen all of them, but definitely I've seen Braindead and Bad Taste, and I've seen the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I've seen the King Kong movie, and I saw The Lovely Bones, I think it is. I don't remember if I liked it or not. All I remember is I think I saw it. And he is a great director. But you see the extremes of Bad Taste, and then where we go with a Lord of the Rings trilogy, and you say, whoa, you just don't connect the dots, because Bad Taste is a great film, but it's extremely, extremely gory, violent, disgusting. It's everything that a conservative person fears, their kid watching. It really is. I mean, it's just beyond belief crazy. Which, to me, I watched it when I was a kid. I don't know how young, but I was definitely a kid, and I think I saw it by accident. I think somebody in my family was watching it. I happened to walk in, and nobody said anything. And I loved it instantly, because this was, like, edgy beyond belief. I mean, it was way worse than any of the Freddy movies or any of the Jason movies or Michael movies, Chucky movies. This was just beyond belief. You had never seen anything like this. You just saw heads being cut off and chainsaws going through people's faces and people being eaten by Peter Jackson, by the way. He makes a cameo in this movie. And it's like the greatest gore fest of all time. This is a fantastic movie. It really is. I sound like a sicko, but You know what? It was fun. You know, when I don't always like gore. Don't get me wrong. I'm not like a gore hound necessarily. It's just that when it's done right, I love it. And then there's some times where I say, well, that was unnecessary. You know, but in this film, it works. It makes the film. I mean, that's the point. That's the point of the film. It's supposed to be this really crazy B-movie-like adventure that you go on, and it's fun. It's about aliens, and they're disguised as humans, and they're killing people and going crazy. And it's a great film. It really is. It's one of my favorite alien films. It's one of my favorite horror films. I count it as horror. You know, I count it as a horror film. I know that there's some people who say that this is a science fiction film. I've talked to some people who say it's a science fiction film, just like Alien, but then I say, wait a minute, but Alien's a horror film too. So I don't know, genre is a little crazy. Christian has talked about that in the past, where he says, genres can pretty much expand out to other things, which is true. I mean, I agree with that, and this film definitely does that, and does it well. Writing, fantastic for what it is, definitely. Acting, I love it. I love this. I love this entire film. It's put together so well. The special effects, great. I love the special effects in this movie. It's all practical effects. I think for the most part, it works. I mean, it's great. It's fantastic. It's so much fun to watch. It reminds me of the old Evil Dead movie, and it really does have that kind of level of gore. However, I do think that this is, in some ways, more crazier and a little bit more fun for me than the Evil Dead, even though I love Evil Dead, because it's just wacky. You know, it kind of just went with, okay, this is what we're going to be. We're going to be completely wacky, just go crazy, like a crazy old EC horror comic or something like that. I love this film. I know I sound like a broken record when I keep saying that, but it's the truth. This is fantastic. Everybody should see this movie who is of the appropriate age. I don't recommend you do what I did and watch it when I was a kid, because you never know how kids are these days. A lot of them get disturbed by little things. So be really careful letting a kid watch it, but you enjoy it. Watch it, sit down. Don't eat if you're one of those queasy people. You know, you get queasy when you see violence. Do not eat then, if that's the case. If not, have fun. Take popcorn, get some drinks with your friends. Watch this film by yourself. Watch it with friends. It's just great. I love this movie.
Now, with the fact that the aliens work for an intergalactic fast food chain, and the fact that they turn this entire town of people into fast food, some people have read this film as being sort of a critique of the fast food industry. And I could see why people would see that, but I personally think Peter Jackson just had this fun, ridiculous idea and decided to run with it. And then you have the boys, these government agents who are sent in to kill the aliens, and what I love about these characters is never in a million years would these guys actually be government agents, but that's what makes the movie so funny. Like, you have one character named Ozzy, and they clearly imply at one point that Ozzy has some severe psychological issues. Like, at one point they make reference to him having a personality disorder.
Well, guess I'll have to issue a gun to Ozzy.
Yeah, but don't forget about his personality disorder.
Open season on ETs, Frank? Remember, Ozzy, get in quietly, get out quietly. Well, I certainly hope that is the case.
I just wish we didn't have to wear all this crap.
Yeah, but you know what the rules are. When we work undercover, we have to remain faceless. Oh, I get it. Just in case we kill a lot of innocent people.
I also love how he's sort of a stereotypical metalhead, and I also love a lot of the little pop culture references that he makes, like the fact that he's wearing a Tales from the Crypt t-shirt, and then he makes a reference to, like, Star Trek at one point, he makes a reference to, like, Doctor Who.
I'm gonna head off in the direction that alien joker was going when me and Derek caught him this morning. He must have been going somewhere. They probably got a base up there or something.
They don't need a base. They could just beam themselves down from their spaceship.
Well, maybe they haven't seen Star Trek, Ozzy. There you go, Oz. Stick this stuff on. We ought to have a look around. If these are aliens, they might have parked the spaceship somewhere around here.
They might have come in a telephone box.
And then you have Derek, who's actually played by Peter Jackson in the film. Peter Jackson actually has a dual role in this movie. He plays the character of Derek, and he also plays an alien named Robert.
Stay where you are then, and I'll give you an eyewitness description of this intergalactic wanker. Well, I would describe him as sort of human-shaped. He's got jeans and a blue shirt on.
Oh, Christ, he's not the bloody farmer.
Yeah, but there's something strange about him, though. Like he's got a screw loose or something.
It is a bloody farmer.
Yeah, Derek strikes again. This isn't going to be another false alarm like the Minett Street invasion alert, is it?
Well, how do you explain the disappearance of an entire township then, Frank? Oh, the Kiwi Jonestown, of course, that's it. Drinking beer laced with cyanide from little polystyrene cups.
Yeah. Okay, Derek, just do me one favour.
What?
Try not to make him extinct before we get there. Out. Christ, what a dog. How the hell did he get in this team?
But Derek's an absolutely hilarious character. And Robert's actually the alien who kills Derek, at least before he comes back to life, and the scene where Derek gets quote-unquote killed is actually a really well-edited scene, especially considering the fact that both characters are played by the same actor. And the aliens in this movie are pretty hilarious as well. I mean, they're evil. I mean, they just killed an entire town full of people, but they're still genuinely pretty funny, especially their leader.
I'll be there in a moment. Welcome, my friends. The job is almost done. We take off for home tomorrow. I'm sure you'll be pleased to be leaving this shitty planet. In the meantime, I must impress upon you the importance of remaining in human form, no matter how awkward, uncomfortable, and ugly it makes you feel. We are so close to success that we must take no chances. Sad news is that we will be heading for Nelignod with 6 of our co-workers in a state of permanent death. They died today, murdered by some real arseholes.
And I love how towards the end of the film it becomes this, like, crazy action film where the boys have to rescue this collector who's been kidnapped by the aliens, and there's this epic shootout.
Got him! Good one! Get the bastards!
I also love when Derek comes back to life, he becomes almost like a slasher movie villain, where he's hacking up these aliens with a chainsaw, and you almost find yourself feeling almost sorry for the aliens.
Derek! Bastard! Jesus! He's gone apeshit! Bastard! Let's get the hell out of here!
But yeah, the movie's just hilarious, but it's gory and disgusting, it's really cheesy, it's everything that you would want out of a horror comedy. There's also a little Stephen King reference where you find out that the town right next to the town that this movie takes place in is called Castle Rock. I'm assuming that was a Stephen King reference, unless there actually is a Castle Rock in New Zealand, or maybe it's a reference to Lord of the Flies. So, that was my review on Peter Jackson's Bad Taste, and bye.